Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Darren Brown. This is the California Dream podcast, and I want to welcome everyone from California, from the U.S. outside of California, international listeners. From the statistics, actually about half of our audience is outside the United States, so wherever you happen to be listening from, thanks for tuning in, and thanks for taking time to listen. Today in the weekly roundup, I'm going to focus in on just a single topic. And this is a topic that is really important to me. It was actually one of the major issues why I started thinking about California independence, why I started getting involved in this movement and taking the time to set up a podcast and do all this stuff. And that issue is healthcare. So it is no secret that the United States has just about the worst healthcare system among the major industrialized countries on Earth. We have some of the poorest outcomes, and yet we pay the most amount of money per capita to get those poor outcomes. And this past week, there was a bill that was in the Assembly, the State Assembly, California. And this bill was a single-payer healthcare bill. So it was a proposal to set up a single-payer system in the state of California. And this bill was defeated. So actually, it never came up for a vote. So there was a vote that needed to take place, I think, by the end of January, and they simply just decided not to have the vote on it. Now, there's a number of different aspects of this topic and this bill in particular that I want to get to. There's a lot of different moving parts going on here. There's a lot of different things to consider, and it's kind of a complicated issue. So I want to kind of disentangle some of those different pieces of the puzzle and go over what I think about what happened and how we should think about this. So the first thing to start with, I think, is just the purely political aspect of it. Why did this not pass? I think this is a pretty easy conclusion to come to. The reason it didn't pass is not because the legislators, looked at the facts and the evidence and they decided that this was just not workable, and they just had a purely objective viewpoint that this was something that they needed to shelve. They were, of course, under tremendous pressure from health insurance industry, hospitals, doctors, and Chamber of Commerce. A lot of pressure from big business to kill this. And that's really the main reason why this died, is because they're, beholden to the donors. And so they do what the donors say. And this is a problem that we have in California, just like we have in Washington, D.C. It's not like we're somehow immune from the effects of lobbying and big money in California. Far from it. And I think it was pretty evident that this was not really a serious attempt to get this through. It seemed to be cobbled together at the last minute. With only a few weeks before the deadline. I think we should call out Governor Newsom. He didn't really say anything about it. He didn't really take an active role in garnering support for it, even though this was one of the main issues that he ran on, saying, I'm a big supporter of single payer, and so on. Well, words and promises are one thing, but actions speak louder than words, and I think the governor's inaction on this and inability to get this through, which he is the leader of the Democratic Party in the state. And so he has a responsibility, if he ran on an issue, to try and get it through. And he didn't do that. So that was a major problem. So this aspect of it, the fact that there's big money and lobbyists that really put a lot of pressure on lawmakers to kill this, and say, you can't have what most of the rest of the industrialized countries in the world have. We don't think you're worth it. That is certainly an aspect of this, and that's a level of analysis that we need to consider. But I want to go a little bit beyond that. So I want to talk about some economic aspects of this, and then the economic aspects of it will wrap back around to the politics. So I have talked earlier about single payer, about healthcare, and I've talked about it from the viewpoint of California being a currency user. So one of the things that we must keep in mind when we're thinking about these funding issues is the difference between a currency issuer and a currency user. The state of California is not a currency issuer. It does not issue its currency. The state of California uses the United States dollar, but it does not issue it. The federal government issues United States dollar. It's the currency issuer. So this means there's a fundamental difference between trying to get single payer at the federal level versus trying to get it at the state level. The major difference then being that at the federal level, the funding mechanism is really just the votes. And I literally mean that. Where are they going to find the money to fund healthcare at the federal level? They will simply create it. They issue the currency, they create the money out of thin air. That's how all spending happens at the federal level, not just for healthcare. That's how it happens for Social Security, for defense, for anything that the federal government spends money on. It's all new money. It's all money that's created literally out of thin air by typing on computers. So it's not a matter of where you find the money at the federal level. Now, that doesn't mean that you can just spend on anything you want, and you don't have to consider the effects of that on the economy and on different sectors of the economy and the different ramifications of that. You definitely have to think about those things. But it means that the question that you're thinking about is not, where are we going to get the money from? That question's off the table. Or it should be, if everyone understood how this worked. As it is, most people don't understand, and so that's not how the conversation goes. But that's how it should go at the federal level. That is different from the situation in the state of California if we try to implement a single-payer healthcare system. Because we use the US dollar, because we're a currency user as a state, we do need to acquire US dollars to pay for and fund any healthcare system, any single-payer system in the state. So when we ask how are we going to pay for it in California, that is a very real question. That is something that we definitely need to consider. And this is one of the points that was used in the rhetoric against the bill is, well, the numbers don't add up, right? This is going to double taxes. And the corresponding tax proposal that went along with this would increase taxes quite a bit. Now, even within the context of realizing that we do have to find the money to pay for it in California, it's still a good deal. I mean, it's still better than what we would have. And most of the advocates for this at the state level do make this argument that, look, yes, taxes are going to increase. You're going to be paying more in your taxes of various forms. You will be removed from the burden of paying the insurance companies and the doctors and the hospitals and the pharmaceutical companies, and most people would end up better in the end. They would end up paying less money because the system is more efficient. When you increase efficiency, it costs less, and you've removed the profit motive. So, these are arguments that many people have made. So I'm not really saying anything new here. But what I want to get at is that at the state level, these are considerations that have to be made. We do have to make the argument that we can find the money, that there will be enough money from somewhere to pay for this, that it will save people money, that it's in their best interest to do it. And that is a question that has to be addressed, as opposed to the federal level. Whereas if we were trying to get single payer at the federal level, we could largely dismiss that question. We could say, that's off the table. Let's talk about other things. And this is what I want to get at here is, what are we talking about when we talk about healthcare? Well, the goal with healthcare, as with any other public good, is we want the goods and services. Let me give you an example of another situation that maybe will put this into context. And this is an example that other MMT people have given from time to time, so I'm kind of cribbing from them, but it's a very good example, so I'm going to repeat it here. Let's say that you wanted to give every Californian in the state a new pony. Okay, now you could say, well, why are we going to do that? Well, let's not worry about that for now. Let's just say in this hypothetical world, that's something that we all decided that we wanted to do. We want every single person in the state to have a new pony. Now, what do we have to ensure happens so that we get that? Well, you could focus on the money. And you could say, well, let's see. A pony, if I go down and I want to buy a pony, it costs this much money. So if I could just multiply the number of ponies that we need to give, there's, almost 40 million people in California. So if I multiply 40 million by the cost of a single pony, then that's how much money we would need to have ponies for everybody. Now, I want you to stop and think about that for just a moment and think, there's a problem with this kind of argument. So stop and think about what the problem with this kind of calculation is. What you should realize is that you can't extrapolate from a single pony and just multiply by the number that you want. Why can you not do that? Well, it should be pretty obvious. There are not 40 million ponies in the state. In fact, I don't even know if there's 40 million ponies that we could get from anywhere, but there's certainly not 40 million ponies in the state of California. So that means you could create all the money that you want. Even if California had an endless supply of money, and it could spend unlimited amounts of money to implement this program to give everybody a pony, it wouldn't matter. Because you just don't have the real resources in place. That's what all of this is about. It's not about money, it's about delivering the real resources. When we talk about healthcare, we really shouldn't be caring about the dollars and cents. We should be caring about whether people get healthcare. So what would we have to do in real terms to get these ponies to everybody? We're not going to be able to do it all at once. You can think about, well, we're going to have probably a breeding program. We're going to have people that are going to have to raise these ponies. We're going to have to feed all the ponies. We're going to have a way of taking care of the manure. We are going to have a way to deliver them to everybody. A lot of people probably don't know how to handle a pony. They don't know how to take care of it. So we'll have to have people that train people to take care of a pony. And we'll have to educate a bunch of people to train the people to take care of the ponies. You see where I'm going with this, right? There's a whole bunch of steps that have to go into place first before we can have this ability to give everybody a pony. So that's what's important, not the money. It's what's in place in the economy that you can deliver to people. Okay, so take that example of the pony and just transfer it to healthcare. Every time that we were talking about a pony, replace it with healthcare. And now you see what the situation is. Even if we had an unlimited amount of money, that's not really the important thing, because again, it's about delivering healthcare. It's not about paying for a bunch of stuff. So what do you need to deliver healthcare? Oh, right. You need doctors. You need hospitals. You need community health centers. You need medicine. You need equipment. You need all of these things. You need nurses. And you could say, well, those things cost money, so we just have to get the money. But that's the same mistaken type of thinking that we were discussing with the ponies. When we were talking about the ponies, we said, oh, it's just cost this much for a pony. We just multiply by 40 million and hey, we got all our ponies. And we said, no, it's not as simple as that. You have to think about what's involved. It's the same with healthcare. You can't just put a monetary amount on this is how much, we can just create enough money to do this. You have to make sure that you have the infrastructure and the resources in place. So does California have all the resources in place to deliver full health care to everybody? Does it have all the nurses and doctors? Does it have all the health centers and equipment? Does it have all the hospitals and community centers? I don't think so. Probably not. We probably need a lot more hospitals. We need a lot more emergency rooms. We need a lot more community health centers. We need a lot more nurses and doctors and medicine and all that stuff. We need more. So that means that the fight over getting health care to everybody is not really about gathering more money to pay for it. It's about making sure that you have the structure of the economy in place that you can develop the resources to give the health care to everybody. That's what the important thing is. And now we see what the distinction is between being a currency issuer and a currency user. If you issue your own currency, you can simply decide we need these resources in place so that we can deliver these resources to people in the future, and then you simply decide to spend on it. So you decide we need nurses and doctors, so you make it a priority. You say, we're going to educate this many nurses and doctors, and that means we need to have colleges to teach them. We need people that are going to be employed to teach them, and we're going to pay to do that, so we will issue currency to do that. And once those people are available, then we also need the infrastructure, we need the buildings and the equipment and all that stuff. So we will start spending for that now. We will start paying people and funding things to have that in place so that all of this will be in place later. It's the same as with the ponies when we were talking about, we need to breed ponies. We need to have people to take care of the manure. We need to have people to organize all the logistics. We need people to transport the ponies. We need people to train people how to use ponies, all this kind of stuff. That's what I'm talking about, except it's with healthcare instead of ponies. And a currency issuer simply decides, we want this. This is a priority. We're going to do it. And so we do it. We don't have to worry about the funding. We do have to worry about the effects, but the question of how you're going to find the money, that's not an obstacle. When you're a currency user, however, you do have to think about those issues. You do have to ask, how are we going to fund not only the healthcare, how are we going to fund the infrastructure to get there? How are we going to fund educating everybody? How are we going to fund getting the buildings and the equipment and all that kind of stuff? And so there's a number of different aspects here. One question you could ask is, does California have the ability to implement and get the infrastructure and then fund a single-payer healthcare like this at the state level as a currency user inside the United States? And I think the answer to that is actually yes, at least for the foreseeable future. Right now, we have a pretty significant budget surplus. If California was considered to be a separate country, we have, I believe, the highest median income of any population on Earth. So we're basically the wealthiest people in the world. We have the highest income. So even being within the United States and not having the power of the purse like the federal government has, I think it's definitely possible for California to institute a single-payer healthcare system, even at the state level, where you would have to actually find the money and have the funding mechanisms. I think it's very doable, at least for the short to intermediate term. And I think we should do this. Now we come around to the politics again. So I've explained the economics. I've explained how we're not the federal government, for the moment at least. We're still a currency user because we're just a state government. We do have to find the money. We have to tax or borrow or do whatever to come up with the money to pay for it. And I said, California, I think, is one of the few states maybe the only state in the country that could do this, but I think it is possible for California to do it. So that's the economics behind it. But now it wraps back into the politics. And there's a number of aspects to this involving the politics that are super important here. So one of the political issues with this is that this funding question, although I think it's feasible, it's always lurking in the background. You're always having to keep track of the numbers from year to year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And you keep having to think about this, and this is on the minds of everybody. And there may even come a point where you have to make some difficult decisions because of this. And you do have to explain that, yes, we do have to raise taxes to fund this. So there's that aspect. Another political aspect, and this is the really important one that I want people to think about. Part of the funding mechanism that the legislators had in mind when they were thinking about this bill and the corresponding amendment, they intended to take much of the money that we get from the federal government for programs that we have in place at the moment and requests from the federal government that we be able to use that money for our single-payer program. This is a small piece of text from the bill that just died. So it says, quote, "It is the intent of the legislature to work to obtain waivers and other approvals relating to Medi-Cal, the Federal Children's Health Insurance Program, Medicare, PPACA, and any other federal programs pertaining to the provision of health care so that any federal funds and other subsidies that would otherwise be paid to the state of California, Californians, and healthcare providers would be paid by the federal government to the state of California and deposited in the CalCare Trust Fund." Okay, in English, in really plain English, what this is saying is the state of California is going to Washington, D.C., to the federal government and saying, all of that money that you're giving us right now, we want to use it a different way. We want permission. We're requesting permission to use the money that you're giving us for federal programs to use for our state program. Currently, we have the Biden administration, and you never know what to expect from Democrats in D.C., but presumably they would be okay with this, and they would say, fine, okay, you can have this money, you can do what you want with it, you can get a waiver. You can get these waivers, you can do it for something else. What do we do if a few years from now, let's say in 2024, when maybe the Republicans take both houses of Congress and the presidency, and they say, you know what? We don't like you using money for single payer because we think it's a bad idea. And you know what? We don't like California either. We're going to try and make this a failure. We're going to really make it a failure so that you never think about doing this kind of thing ever again in California or anywhere else. We're taking away your permission. We're just going to take the money away. They have the right to do that. They're the federal government. They can say, you want this money? You got to go back and use Medicare and Medi-Cal and CHIP and all these other federal programs. If you want to use it for something else, tough. Kick rocks. What do you do then? Do you see what I'm getting at? As long as we're within the federal system, even if it's possible, even if it's feasible for us to implement this at the state level, because we use the US dollar, because we're a currency user, because in the final analysis we're dependent on the federal government and Congress for money, they can always take it away. They can always take it away at any moment that they want. It's the same thing with the Supreme Court. We've had these conversations before on a number of different issues. We can pass environmental legislation. It can be struck down by the federal courts or it can be struck down by the Supreme Court. We can have worker regulations. We can have all these other progressive policies we have. The Supreme Court can just overrule anything. Like magic pixie dust. They've granted themselves the authority to just do anything. The same way that the Supreme Court is an obstacle to getting things that we want here because we always have this thing over our head that it can be taken away by the courts. The same thing is true for funding from money from the federal government. They could take it away, and that would be a big hole in the funding mechanism for this program, and it would be a big problem, and we would always have that problem. And there's only one way out of this, only one way out of this predicament, and that's to be in charge of your own money, to be in charge of your own currency, to have the power of your own purse. And there's only one way to do that, and that is independence. So I hope I gave you a lot to think about. I tried to explain a number of different aspects of this and how I think they fit together. And I hope I was able to explain to you why the healthcare issue was such an important issue for me in thinking about independence. If you understand the economics, you understand the monetary system, you're led to this conclusion. You're led to considering independence. Okay, on Monday, I'll be dropping another interview that I had with Jeremy Zogby, and I have some other interviews coming up later, so look forward to those. If you're listening on a podcast platform, be sure to rate the podcast, and if you're listening on YouTube, be sure and like, share, and subscribe as always, as it helps. Have a good week, and I'll talk to you again later.